Hi everyone, I'm here with a little bit of a different project today. This is a tutorial on how to make a very easy cloth mask for donation to hospitals or nursing homes, whoever is in need. Now, I made this after consultation with a nurse friend of mine who had a couple of things that she really wanted in a mask. It had to have pleats so it would really expand to cover the face. She wanted some way to have a nice tight fit around the nose, so this has a sleeve for a pipe cleaner to be inserted or another wire that you have, so it'll really bend and kind of flex around the nose to keep it nice and tight. Elastic for around the ears, and I wanted an external casing for the elastic in case it becomes damaged or needs replacing. This will be easy to just thread another, string through so that it can still be used. It also has a pocket for a replaceable filter. You can stick a piece of non-woven fabric in here, like a coffee filter or whatever your hospital is using, to act as a replaceable filter. So these can be sanitized and used over and over again. So we're going to make one. It's very easy. If your local hospitals are in need, then this is a great way to help out. So I have this little downloadable pattern that you can get on my website. It's very bare bones, but it will help you get the job done. For each mask, you will need an 18.5 by 9.5 inch rectangle of fabric. Non-directional is a little bit easiest to work with, and it needs to be pre-washed. I'm using this ice-dyed fabric just because it was the only fabric I had that was already washed. So I have other fabric in the laundry that I'll use in the future. In addition to this, you also need 2 squares that are 2 inches by 4 inches. I guess those are rectangles. 2 rectangles that are 2 by 4, and these will create the little elastic casing on the side. You'll also need elastic. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic. It's just kind of what I had. I know a lot of hospitals are asking for non-latex elastic. Honestly, I have no idea if this is a non-latex or not, but it's what I had. You will need 2 8-inch pieces. And this is kind of where you'll need to use your best judgment. I find 8 inches to be comfortable, but after you make the first one, try it on and see if you think it should be tighter or looser. I think everyone's elastic might have a little bit different stretch to it, so make one, see how you like it, and adjust from there. You will also need a pipe cleaner if you want to have the optional kind of pocket at the top for a pipe cleaner. You'll need to trim this down, so you'll also need a good pair of scissors. You will also need a removable marker. I'm using a friction pen, but a water erasable or air erasable pen will do the trick. So first thing we need to do is all 3 of these rectangles, we are going to do a double fold hem on the top and the bottom, the narrow sides of all 3 of these. And you're just going to fold over a little bit and then fold it over again and stitch that down. Now on these little rectangles, I'm just doing like, an 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. On the larger one, I'm doing a 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. So 1/4 of an inch, iron, 1/4 of an inch, press. So let's move over to the ironing station and get these prepped. Okay, we are at our ironing board, and you are just going to fold down a 1/4 of an inch, and you can just eyeball this. 1/4 of an inch, press, and then another 1/4 of an inch. And this is just going to create a nice edge for the overlapped portion of the mask so that it can be washed without coming apart. And then we do the same thing on the other narrow side. And then for these little guys, I'm not going to do a full 1/4 of an inch. I just kind of do a little mini double fold, press, and I'll do the same thing to that second one. Okay, I'm just using a straight stitch to stitch these double fold hems down, and I'm just gonna do a double line of stitching to kind of stitch down close to the outer edge and then to stitch down this flap so it'll be easier to feed the elastic through later. Now I'm going to do the same stitching on the large triangle and the other small triangle, and I'll meet you back when it is time to mark for the next step. Okay, we are back. I have sewn down my double fold edges on the large rectangle and the small ones, and I've pressed these in half with the wrong sides together. And set those to the side right now because now we need to mark this large rectangle. So it might help to print out the pattern here and just kind of have it in the same orientation as how you're going to mark. Now this is marked with all these lines, and I have labeled the spaces between the lines to make it a little bit easier. So the first line is going to be 1/4 inch, and it's basically going to be at the edge of that double fold seam line. So I'm just going to mark that on both sides. And then we move down 1 2/4 inches. So I'm just going to keep on going as instructed in the pattern and meet you back when all of my lines are marked. All of my lines are marked, and I have my arrows here on the pattern that show me which way to fold this to create the pleats. Now they go in separate directions because we're going to fold this mask back up on itself, and we want all the pleats to go in the same direction when it's in its final form. So I think it's a little bit easier to turn it this way to fold the pleats. So I'm going to grab my pins, and I'm going to take this second mark here that I have, and I'm going to pinch it and fold it up to meet the top marking, that 1/4 inch line. I'm just going to hold it in place and pin it. Now, if you are one of the types of people who pins going this way so that the head of your pin is towards the inside, you really need to pin the other way for this, because you won't have access to those pins unless you want to sew over them. So I recommend pinning with the heads of the pins out. And then we want to grab this line, I have marked my fold line here in the middle in addition to out on the sides, just to make it a little bit easier. So you want to grab this mark and fold it up to the mark just above it, hold it, and again pin. So that will create 2 pleats on what will be kind of the inside of the mask. So now we're going to spin this around so it's a little bit easier to pleat going the other way. And I'm actually going to turn my pattern around too, so it's easier to identify which lines I need to match up. So this is our fold line. I'm going to grab the next set of markings and fold it up. So right here to its neighbor and pin. And then I'm just following the arrows in the pattern. You can tell I don't make a lot of pleated skirts, huh? My pleating technique is not amazing. Okay, last one. So obviously this is a pattern that I've kind of cobbled together from a few different sources and with some help from a nurse friend of mine. But if your local hospital is asking for a specific pattern, then by all means use the pattern that they have requested, because that's the one that they're going to want to use. So this is just a suggestion, but you know, by all means go with what people are asking for in your area. So now that we have all of our pleats pinned, we're going to take our little elastic sleeves, and this is the front of the mask. This is the top, this is the bottom, and this is the front. So we're going to center our little elastic sleeves along each side, just like this. And I'm just aligning the raw edges and kind of visually centering it between these fold lines that I marked. And now we are going to fold the top down at the fold line. And then we're going to fold the bottom up at the fold line. And just kind of straighten everything. And now we are going to make one last mark. I'm going to rotate this just because it's a little bit easier for me. But we are going to mark 1/4 inch down this top edge. And that is to create our pipe cleaner sleeve. Now we're not going to sew this yet, but the next step is to sew up these raw edges, but we do not want to sew from this marking to the top. We want to leave that open so that it will create a sleeve. So now we're going to sew from the red mark on each side down to the edge. And I do 2 or 3 lines of stitching here. I just have my straight stitch machine with me right now, but if you have a zigzag, or if you don't want to do the pipe cleaner sleeve, you could just serge down these edges. But I'm just going to do 2 or 3 lines of stitching, 1/4 of an inch in, to secure all these layers. Now, there are a lot of layers here with all those pleats, so take your time, hand crank if you need to. Don't sew over your pins, just remove them as you come to them. So let's get this sewn. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine. I am going to start stitching from that red line to the bottom, and I am going to take the time to back stitch at the top and the bottom. I've been back stitching throughout most of this, but definitely here, because this is not going to be stitched over again, so you definitely want to back stitch at this red line. Okay, now this is a lot of layers to sew through. If your machine is having trouble, then try lengthen your stitch length a little bit, change out to a heavier duty needle or just a very sharp needle, or if it starts to get stuck, just hand crank through these areas, because there are, you know, probably 7 or 8 layers of fabric in some of these areas. So take your time and just take it one stitch at a time. Now I'm going to go ahead and stitch this other side, and then I'm going to do a couple of extra lines of stitching on each side. So we're all sewn. I did 3 lines of stitching on each side, and now it's time to turn it right side out. So you just want to find your opening and kind of poke those corners out, and then do the other side. Poke these corners out. Now be careful poking these corners out, because remember, this top edge, the corners weren't sewn down. So give it a little tug. And now we need to address this pipe cleaner casing at the top. So this is the front of our mask. The pleats face down, and on the inside they also face down, and this is the top of your mask. If you hold it up to the light, you might be able to see that marking that we did on the inside that we didn't want to stitch over. So I'm just going to grab a little like bodkin or whatever and make sure these corners are really pressed out, and then I'm going to make sure that they're still open by just sticking that kind of in that seam allowance. Make sure that it's nice and flat. And now we are going to flatten it out as well as we can and draw that 1/4 inch line here on the outside. And if you want to do a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch to make it a little bit easier to feed that wire through, then that's definitely a good idea. Now we're just going to stitch this line, back stitch at each end, and that will create our casing. Okay, so I just stitched that line, and then I pressed it just to get rid of all of our markings from our friction pen. So now it's time to deal with the elastic. You're going to cut 2 8-inch long pieces of elastic. I'm just going to use the lines on my mat here to make that a little bit easier. And then you can just kind of open this little tubing out and feed them through. Since we did those double lines of stitching on the tube, it shouldn't be too hard to kind of feed it through. It's not going to get caught in that double turn edge. And then this is kind of tricky. You're just going to overlap the edge, make sure there's not a twist in the elastic, overlap the edge, and just do a couple of lines of stitching just to secure that. I overlap it about 1/4 of an inch. And I run like 2 lines of stitching back and forth a couple of times. Do that on the other side as well, and then we'll come back. And that's that. I have this kind of raw edge, and I just kind of like pull the elastic around so that raw edge is encapsulated in the pocket. So I do that with both sides. And then it's just time to add our pipe cleaner. Now you can fish this in or if you have like a bodkin, but I find it goes through there pretty quickly. You might need to kind of fuss with the end a little bit, make sure it doesn't get caught on the kind of seam allowance that's turned under, but you really kind of only want it to go to the edge anyway. So I just kind of get it in there and then I trim it to length. Now, once you kind of try this on and it gets bent, this might kind of poke out a little bit more. You can either bend it over for security or you can clip it off a little bit shorter. So there we go. There is our finished mask. It's pretty simple construction. Again, this is the top with the pipe cleaner in it, so it'll fit snugly. It really does quite expand quite a way, so it really kind of tucks under your chin. You know, I'm sitting at home with all this elastic and fabric and just want to help. So if you are a doctor or a nurse and you have any improvements on this pattern, let me know in the comments or email, and I will update this pattern as well as I can to keep it just the best that the medical professionals need. So if you have any questions, then let me know, leave a comment, and I will do my best. Again, I am not a medical professional. I'm just a crafter. Get in touch with your local, not only medical centers, but nursing homes. I know some veterinarians are donating all the masks they have to medical centers, so they might be in need. There's Facebook groups popping up all over that are kind of coordinating this. So I hope you guys enjoy, and stay safe, stay at home, and make as many masks as you can. So I'd say happy quilting, but happy mask making. I guess that's the best I can do today.